Class is now in session. I'm Professor Hockey, and today we will be discussing the upcoming expansion draft that will welcome the Seattle Kraken into the National Hockey League for the 2021-2022 regular season. So we will of course have this 1 year, and we don't exactly know what the format of the upcoming regular season will be, but after that is done, after the playoffs done, we will have our expansion draft, and it will be, well, not even similar, but exactly like the expansion draft that brought the Vegas Golden Knights into the league just a few short years ago. Each team in the NHL, excluding the Vegas Golden Knights actually, will have the opportunity to protect either 7 forwards, 3 defensemen, and 1 goalie, or 8 skaters and 1 goalie. Of course, the 8 skater option, just in case you want to protect more than 3 defensemen, you have that opportunity. And the first time around of this expansion draft, the Sharks got away rather unscathed. They had just signed David Schlemko to a 4-year deal, and after he played 1 year with the Sharks, he ends up getting taken away by the Golden Knights. And compared to how other teams fared in the expansion draft, the Sharks escaped rather well. Schlemko wasn't necessarily a key piece of the Sharks roster, but this time around it seems as though the Sharks will have a bit more trouble. It seems that in most or in both of the situations, they're sort of one protection short to try and escape this one. So it looks like the Sharks will be losing at least a relatively valuable asset. Now, I have outlined here 4 different options that the Sharks have coming in. The first one is that the Sharks go with the 8 skaters and 1 goaltender situation. And at forward, they protect Couture, Kane, Meyer, and Hertl. And then on defense, Vlasic, Carlson, Burns, and Shemek. I should mention that both Vlasic and Carlson, unless they are to waive their no movement clauses, both of those players have to be protected in this situation. The rest of the Sharks roster is up for grabs, except for the players who are of course exempt under the expansion draft rules. Most importantly, that does include Mario Ferraro for the Sharks. Now, in this situation, this would leave Kevin Labanc open to be taken, and that could be pretty bad for the Sharks depending on how this upcoming season goes for Labanc. He just signed a pretty large contract for himself, and it was a contract worthy of the player he was a couple of years ago, but a contract nowhere near worthy of the player he was just this past season. And so we're going to see which Labanc actually shows up. Will it be the 30-point, 40-point Labanc going minus 30 on the season, or will it be the 50-point, 60-point Labanc that his contract you would think demand? If it is that 30-40 point guy with the minus 30, Labanc definitely could be exposed, and maybe the Sharks wouldn't even be all that disappointed to see him be taken by Seattle. Now, of course, the Sharks and all the other teams in the league will be a bit more wary this time around about who they give up. The Vegas Golden Knights managed to find a few diamonds in the rough, which allowed them to be a very, very good team right out of the gate here, even though many predicted it wouldn't go so well. So we'll see if Seattle can do the same thing, and giving the Kraken Labanc could sort of be one of those diamonds in the rough if he's given a bigger role and maybe excels in that. So Sharks, depending on how the season goes, I guess they could do it, but likely will want to avoid it anyway. In the second option, the Sharks, I have them doing the 7 forward, 3 defensemen, and 1 goaltender. At forward, I have Couture, Kane, Meyer, Hertl, and Labanc as the obvious 5. Then the last 2, the Sharks don't necessarily have too many forwards that are really worth trying to protect. I have Donato here, I guess. Sorensen, though I think Sorensen's contract might run out. Otherwise, there's a couple of other options, I guess. But on defense, then Vlasic, Carlson, and Burns. And in this situation, this leaves Radim Shemek open to be taken, and wouldn't be surprised to see him be taken by Seattle anyway. And this is, again, very dependent on how this upcoming season goes. We have not yet seen a full 82-game season from Shemek, and we will actually continue to not see a full 82-game season, considering this upcoming regular season is predicted to be about 60 games or so. But if Shemek continues to improve in that defensive defenseman capabilities, then it's probable that the Sharks wouldn't want to expose him. However, if he sort of goes the way of, let's say, Joachim Ryan a couple of years ago, and he doesn't necessarily fit in on the defensive pairing with Brent Burns anymore, then the Sharks absolutely could go with this option and leave him exposed. But as it was with Labanc, it will heavily depend on how this upcoming season goes. The third option, and probably the craziest one here, is that the Sharks go once again with the 7 forward, 3 defenseman, 1 goaltending protection. The forwards are the same, but on defense, they protect Vlasic, Carlson, and Shemek, leaving Brent Burns unprotected. As I said, a very, very crazy option here, but it is one that the Sharks could technically consider. This past season for Brent Burns was one of his worst as a Shark on this contract that he is currently on, which is this behemoth 8-year, $8 million deal. He's going into his 4th year on that contract, and so by the end of this upcoming regular season, if it is again sort of an underperformance, he's already 35, he'll turn 36 near the end of this coming regular season, so he'll be going on to 36 and 37 into the following year, and if he's already showing decline here in year 3 and year 4 of this contract, what does that mean for year 5, 6, 7, and even 8 if Brent Burns isn't to retire early in this deal? It could end up being pretty bad for the Sharks, so if there is a possibility to unload him to the Seattle Kraken, maybe that's something that the Sharks should try to take advantage of. Of course, as it was with LeBanc and Shemek, if Brent Burns comes out, proves that he is still a number 1 defenseman in the NHL, puts up, let's say, 50 or 60 points in this upcoming potential 60-game season, then of course the Sharks will not want to leave him exposed. But if Brent Burns is once again showing those struggles on defense, being a heavy minus player, maybe only 35, 40 points in a 60-game season, it might not be the worst thing in the world to try and unload this behemoth of a contract to the Seattle Kraken. And the Kraken, they could be sort of tempted to take him on, even if that contract is tough. It should be noted that the Sharks, in those last 4 years, will not be paying as, it was a front-loaded contract in terms of actual dollars, meaning the Kraken will be able to pay him less than the $8 million that his cap hit is. And it should also be mentioned that, maybe the Kraken will want a year or 2 of Brent Burns there as the top guy. We saw that in Vegas with someone like Derek Engelland. Of course, Brent Burns is significantly better than Derek Engelland, but Brent Burns could be sort of the leadership kind of guy that the rest of the players who are likely to be on the younger side look up to for a couple of years before maybe taking a step back and letting the other players perform. So it's a situation to consider, but again, like the first two, heavily depends on how this upcoming season goes. And in the final situation, likely the most likely one to occur, the Sharks either go with the 4-4 protection or the 7-3-1 protection. It doesn't particularly matter, and in the end they just protect whoever they want, and it just ends up being a trade that forces Seattle, or doesn't force, but heavily encourages Seattle to take what the Sharks want them to take. So for instance, saying, here, take this 2nd round pick basically for free, but then don't choose Kevin LeBanc in the expansion draft and instead pick Jacob Middleton or something like that. It was something we saw from multiple teams in the first expansion draft for the Vegas Golden Knights. The Anaheim Ducks ended up trading away heavily touted prospect Shea Theodore, who is currently the number 1 defenseman in Vegas, so that Vegas wouldn't take Sami Vatanen from them for free. Maybe the Sharks won't have to give up such a fantastic prospect like the Ducks had to do, but it's likely that they'll have to part with some sort of asset if they want to keep all of their players. The final thing that I do want to mention in all 4 of these situations, of course, I mentioned that the Sharks are protecting a goalie, and in all 4 situations, it was assumed to be that goalie would be Martin Jones, but that is not necessarily a given how these past couple of seasons have gone for Jones. On his first contract, the 3 years, it was all very good for Jones, and that, of course, ended up earning him this 6-year deal worth $5.75 million, but through the first 2 years of this deal, it has not looked good at all, and if Jones continues to struggle coming into this 3rd year of this deal, there's a very, very likely possibility that the Sharks decide to just protect some random other goalie, let's say Coronar, or even if someone like Dubnyk is a possibility, and they leave Jones exposed. And while the Seattle Kraken might not pick Martin Jones in that situation, I wouldn't even blame them for that. They might want to go for someone like him if there are no better options available. I mean, Martin Jones has been considered a buyout option in these past couple of off seasons for the Sharks, and so if it is again yet another struggle, on this, I guess it would be this 3rd chance at this point, there's definitely a real possibility that he's just left exposed and maybe Seattle ends up taking him. But that will do it for this prediction. Obviously, a lot can change once before the expansion draft actually takes place, and so I will of course reevaluate what the Sharks' options are as we get closer to that moment. Class dismissed.